Hi, you might get two introductions depending on how good I am at editing, which I still have to work on it. But I decided to make an intro really quick to tell you that this video is nearly an hour long. So grab a cup of coffee, put your feet up, and let me tell you about all the books that I read in June. Now, I will try to do my weekly videos next month, so that I can just give you summaries each week. But since I did not do that at all in June, they come in the form of this video here. So let's see if I can edit this in the beginning, and if not, then whatever. But I'm trying to keep my cat from jumping up. But thank you for watching. Hi, welcome back to my channel. I have my June wrap up for you today, and I want to tell you some things about what I had planned for June. Now, I'm just going to hold this up. This is a Goodreads shelf. They're called shelves when you sort out how you want to track the books. And this is page 2. So I know that you cannot see these titles, and I am not going to run this particular group of titles by you. But these are 54 books that I set out to read in June. Now, in May, I read 62 books. So if I read at the pace I was reading in May, I would have gotten those books done. But I tend to kind of judge myself based on past experience. And when I got to June 3rd, I had read 4 books. So by June 3rd, because I had started off June in a very serious fibromyalgia flare, I knew that reading 4 books by June 3rd would indicate that I would read less books in June than I read in May. And I have to make that okay with myself, because reading is for pleasure. Yes, I'm a professional reviewer, but I do read because I love it. I enjoy it. It's my panacea. It's my favorite hobby. But I take it very seriously on the one hand, but I don't want to give myself undue pressure on the other hand. So once I got to June 3rd, as I said, I knew that I was going to read less books. So my goal for June was actually 40 books. I'm glad to say that this was the original goal. And then I moved it down to 40. Just like at the beginning of the year, my reading goal for 2022 was 600 books, but due to a very, very bad experience I had at the end of January, I dropped my reading goal to 400. So I will always adjust my goals and plans to accommodate any kind of change, whether it's a mental health change, whether it's a physical change, whether it's a combination of both, or even if my family needs me more. Like, for example, I think I babysat on Monday for 7 or 8 hours, so I didn't get any reading done during that day, and that's okay. And I have to reassure myself that anything I do has to be balanced. And that balance also includes my spiritual activities, reading the Bible every day, studying for my Christian meetings, So I decided to go into June with a lower expectation so that I wouldn't feel so much pressure. The other thing that I wanted to do in June, which I did not do as well as I would have liked, is I wanted to get my June blog tour titles out of the way and just focus on a bunch of other books that appeal to me or were in the TBR that I was arranging. But that didn't happen. I kind of dragged my feet through the month of June. But I did finish all of my blog tours, and I'll tell you how many I had in a few minutes, but I did get them all done. So then I decided around June 15th to knock out all of my July blog tours. Well, I have 29 blog tours for July, but I've only read 5 of those 29 so far anyway. So I can set goals, but it doesn't always mean that I'm going to meet them. But they are always fluid. I call my TBR fluid, and I also call my goals fluid, because it takes that pressure off. That it's just my innate. It's just part of my personality. So I have to be a little bit flexible. So let's do a wrap up here. let's talk about what I read in June. And I may have already said it, but I read 47 books. And that brings me to 273 books for the year. I read 16,254 pages, which brings me to 90,894 pages for the year. Now, I'm a little happy with myself here, and I'm going to tell you why. Because I read 51 books in January to the tune of 16,081 pages. But in June, I read 47, which was 4 less books, but I read more pages. So I read a couple of books. One was like 464 pages and, just longer books. So that gave me a little bit of a higher page count. So that was a little rewarding. Now, my average page per day, like how many pages I was reading in a day. Well, last month I read an average of 687 pages a day. But this month I averaged 542 pages a day. That 542 pages a day averages over 30 days, and I'm not counting today as a reading day because it's a lot of channel related and blog related things I want to work on. So with the early part of the month when I was in bed more than I wanted to be, I can understand why I read 542 pages a day. My average page per book is 346, and somewhere on my spreadsheet, this is also my yearly average for pages per book. I see it. Nope. My average page per book is 333. I just found it on my spreadsheet. I don't know if you can see that. It's a little blurry, but it's in the middle in the green, 333. So over 2022, my average is 333, but for June, it was 346. Now, of all of these books that I read, 9 were audiobooks and 2 were print ARCs. These 2. I'll show them again in a few minutes. 2 books were library books. 38 were NetGalley ARCs, advanced reader copies in digital format from NetGalley, and a couple of those were also audiobooks from NetGalley, which kind of goes into that 9 audiobooks. My productivity was pretty good. I had 35 blog posts, not blog tours. I posted 35 different posts on my blog. And of those 35, 23 were blog tours, which meant that the remaining were regular titles that I read. On NetGalley, I got 49 NetGalley reviews up. So even though I read less books than the 49, it's because I'm still working on a NetGalley backlog. And for this channel, I made 53 videos. Now, there's going to be another video that we're going to talk about my content. I already put a poll up. I'm already getting good response from the poll, and we'll talk about that another time. But for the channel, like I said, 53 books. I do want to reiterate my favorites from January through June. And for January, my favorite was The Dust Bowl Orphans by Suzette D. Harrison. My February favorite was A Life for a Life by Carol Wyer. My March favorite was Love People Use Things by Joshua Fields, Millbourn, and Ryan Nicodemus. April favorite was Take My Hand by Dolen Perkins-Valdez. My May favorites were 2, A Mother's Heart by Carmel, Harrington, and Unbridled Cowboy by Maisey, Yates. It's very strange for a romance to be one of my favorites. My June favorite was By Her Own Design by Piper Huguley. So those were my favorites for this year so far. Now we're going to briefly touch on the books that I read I neglected to do my Monday reads. I am going to pick that back up come the 4th, which is on a Monday. But because I didn't do any Monday reads or weekly reads for the whole month of June, remember, I was sick a lot in June. I babysat a lot at the last minute in June. So June was kind of a bust. I'm sorry to say that, but it wasn't. But anyway, so at the beginning of June, I read books 15 and 16 of the Kim Stone series by Angela Marsons, and those two books were Stolen Ones and Six Graves. Now, I could have finished those two books in May, but I was doing a particular challenge in June, and two of those two books matched two of the criteria, so I purposefully held them over for June. Okay, I have to edit this, so it might be a little bumpy right here because my camera shut off when I was talking about Kelly Armstrong's A Rip Through Time. So let's pick up with that one. We have a cop who gets attacked, a female cop, and she wakes up in a different time period, and that's the crux of that book. But it came out May 31st, and no, I have not written that review, so I've got to get that review done. And today is a good day for me to clean up my NetGalley queue, and I just may do that. So the Rip Through Time series, let's go down. She's got a lot of series. I love it. Okay, so if you go to Fantastic Fiction, you can tell A Rip Through Time does not have book number 2 listed yet. So I'll patiently wait for that to come up. That would be great. So the next book I read was Out of the Clear Blue Sky by Kristin Higgins. And here we have a couple who are empty nesters, and the wife has a trip planned for her and her husband to go spend some time together. So they go out and they're having dinner, and she's about to tell him about this trip. Well, he's about to tell her something. He's leaving her for another woman. So that was a really good book. Very, very emotional. I really enjoyed it. I like the romantic spin that came out of that sad story. I also read The Lost House of Ireland by Suzanne O'Leary. It is the 4th book in the Starlight Cottages series, and I have read the previous books. They are The Lost Girls of Ireland, The Lost Secret of Ireland, The Lost Promise of Ireland, and then this one, The Lost House of Ireland. And this starts with Allegra Casey finding an engagement ring buried in the sand while on Cape Cod. That ring takes her all the way to Sandy Cove, Ireland. And when she settles in there, she meets first her eccentric neighbors, and that starts starts the beginning of her quest to identify the origin of this ring. And in fact, it belonged to someone named Davina Courtney, and some of those family members are still living there in this area off the coast of Ireland. Very, very sweet story. And then there's Max, who is connected to that family in a certain way, but I'll let you read it to find out. And I loved it because her life was fine in Cape Cod, but a whole new world opens up to her when she's in Ireland trying to find out about that ring. And the only thing is, it presents conflicts with some of the younger generation of that Courtney family. So that was a good book that I read. And then I read As Seen on TV by Meredith Shore, which is here somewhere. Sorry. This was one of my print arcs. And this book, we have a journalist who is basically going to try to create a town and make it like a Hallmark movie. So the town is called Pleasant Hollow, and the town is anything but, and nothing that she thinks should be there is there. There's no like white picket fences. There's no quaint ice cream shop or a cute little antique shop. So she's trying to find out how she can change the course of what's going on in that town. So that was a cute book. I loved it. Then I read Midnight's Budding Moral by Carolyn Miller. Now, that was, I think, that was the Regency Wallflowers #2. And I did not have time to read the first book in that series, but I did get that one read, and I did enjoy it. So this, like I said, is the second book in a series that I haven't had the chance to read the first book. This came out in May. It's by Carolyn Miller, and it's a historical Christian romance. So it's very sweet. I only gave this book 3 stars. However, I did not go any higher than that. Then I read Good Husbands by Kate Ray. Now, this book was a psychological thriller to the nth degree. And in Good Husbands, basically, you have 3 wives, and they each got a letter saying that their husbands raped a girl when they were back in college in their sorority, not sorority, whatever it is called. And this to me was a book that was based on people's moral compass. I think you should watch my video because I think this was an excellent book. I only gave it 4 stars, but I loved the book. I loved the message that was in that book. Like basically you have 3 couples who are living normal lives, pleasantly happy, very comfortable, very compatible with each other. But now each wife has to make that decision if she's going to deal with the fact that her husband committed this heinous crime, even though it was many, many years before, and where it goes from there. So that was a really good book. Then I had 2 books that have been on my TBR for the longest time. And when I say the longest time, well, not the longest time, like If the Shoe Fits by Julie Murphy. That is from last August, but I just read it a couple of weeks ago. That is meant to be book #1, and it's obviously a takeoff of Cinderella, modern day, like a remake of it. So that book review hasn't been written, but I hope to write it today and maybe even do a video on it today. Now, a book that came out on May 3rd was in the Meant to Be series #2. And this one, though, was by Jasmine Guillory, and it was called By the Book. And this book was a really good book, and I really did enjoy it. And I'm so glad that I read the first one in the series, because I'm just trying to scroll down to see if the book #3 is coming up. No, book #3 isn't noted yet. But I like this book because we have here a woman named Isabel, or Izzy, and she gets overlooked at the publishing house she works for, mainly because of the color of her skin. So she is trying to get a promotion, and things just don't work out that way. And I liked it because it addressed the fact that she wasn't given her due promotion, mainly because of the color of her skin. But it was a romance, and it was very, very sweet, and I liked it. Then I read Thank You Next by Annie J. Christopher, and it's just kind of like a romantic comedy. There was some deeper moments in it, but we have Andy. I'm sorry, that's the author. In this book, we have Alex Turner, is a divorce attorney, and she cannot believe that her ex is on Say Yes to the Dress with his new fiance, and they're picking out a wedding dress. Well, wait a minute. When we were together, he wasn't interested in marriage, kids, and a future, but now all of a sudden he's on a show called Say Yes to the Dress. So she's wondering, why do all of my exes have great relationships? Either they're engaged, married, or in a stable relationship. So she plans on interviewing all of her exes and figuring out where she went wrong with each of them. Well, she gets accompanied on this little journey with Will Harkness, and he's there to try to help her through this battle, but also to help her to open her eyes that he might just be the one for her. So I really like that one. And then I had, get this right, yes. Then I had An Island Summer by Jenny Hale. Now, I love Jenny Hale, and I do have this as a print arc, but I'm not going to get up. It's in the other room, I'm sorry. This was a very, very sweet book because we have here Megan Gray has a cottage that was left to her by her grandfather, and she's trying to restore it. But while she's trying to restore it, she finds a photo of somebody she doesn't recognize. So she digs back into the history behind this particular photo. And that's when she also meets somebody named Toby Myers, and the whole status of, not status, but her whole future with regard to this cottage that was left to her by her grandfather, that comes up. And she starts over. And she starts over because she had a dead end waitressing job. But one thing I really liked about this book is when she went to start over, her friend went with her and they both found jobs. Yes, they were waitress jobs, but Megan had an affinity as a chef, and her ultimate dream is to be either, have her own restaurant or be a chef on the line. And I don't know, I really liked it. I gave it 4 stars, and it's given me sort of kind of like a feeling to retell you or to tell you about it, because there was an emotional edge to this book that I got a lot out of. Then I read The Beach Trap by Allie Brady, and this was a good book. And yes, this review is already up because this came out June 14th. And in this particular book, there was Kat and Blake, who, when they were 12 years old, they were in summer camp and they got along like 2 peas in a pod. But when it was almost time to go home, one of their fathers showed up, and the other girl's like, wait, he's my father, but he's your father? Well, the thing is, the father was leading 2 lives as a bigamist. He had 2 families. And so this severed the relationship between the 2 girls, and it took the father to pass away for the 2 girls to try to work out their differences. And it's called The Beach Trap because there's a beach house that was left to the both of them. One wants to sell it, one wants to keep it. One has memories of that beach house, the other one has no good memories. A really, really good book. Then I read The Songs That Could Have Been by Amanda Wen, and this was the Sedgwick County Chronicles #2. And the first one I really wanted to read, and I even downloaded it from my library, but I didn't have time. And the first one was Roots of Wood and Stone. But this one was really good. It was a Kriegel publication, which means it was a Christian romance. And it was really good because we have Lauren Anderson's grandmother, Rosie, and her mother starts asking about somebody named Ephraim. And the family has never heard of Ephraim. Who was Ephraim? Well, this means that Lauren is going to dig into the past, and that's when she learns about the race relations and the segregation that existed at the time her grandmother was in school. And there was only a few Black students at that school, and one of them was Ephraim, and how the grandmother Rosie at the time when she was a teenager didn't understand why Blacks and whites didn't get along and Blacks and whites couldn't be together. Well, that led to heartbreak, and then you have decades that passed, and now that Rosie is ill, she starts mumbling and talking about this Ephraim. So the book takes place back in 1954 and present day. Very, very, very good book. I would say that I'm reading 2 to 3 books from Kriegel Publications every month now, and I'm really, really glad about that. Then I read Sleeping Dolls by Helen Pfeiffer. This is book number 6 in the Detective Morgan Brooks series. And this was a good one because this particular murder gave Morgan a chilling feeling. When she goes into it, all the curtains are drawn and all the clocks have been stopped at 6. And that is an old Victorian tradition. And in the next murder, the same MO happens. So that was the crux of that one. Then I read The Boyfriend by Kerry Wilkinson. Now, this was a really, really good psychological thriller because in this particular book, wait a minute, I just closed my review. Yes, I have to look at my reviews because, you read a lot and you're sick and you don't always remember everything just like that. But here we have Jody. Her father has passed and he was the mayor. He was every man to every person. But when she's going through his things, she finds a t-shirt that belonged to her old boyfriend. Well, when they were dating or they were kids, like 15, 16, the boyfriend went missing and later his body was found. Now that Jody discovers his t-shirt, she wonders, did my father kill him? Has he been hiding this whole time? Yeah, really, really good. Really good book by Kerry Wilkinson. Loved it. Then I read Here for the Drama by Kate Bromley, another romantic comedy. Looks like I read quite a few romantic comedies this month. And this one was about Winnie, who is a personal assistant to a playwright. And she has been working for this lady for 5 years. And she is writing a screenplay. And her boss constantly tells her, yes, I'm going to read it. Yes, I'm going to read it. But she never gets around to it. Well, they travel to Paris because her boss is having a play produced. And our protagonist, I just forgot her name, meets somebody, and the man that she meets and kind of falls for almost automatically is her boss's nephew. And her boss says, no, I don't want you to date him. That would be too messy because it could mess up our working relationship. So her boss comes up with, well, you're just going to date a few men. I don't know if they're in London. I said Paris, but they're in London. So she is like swiping left or whatever, however that goes. But meanwhile, she really, really likes, Juliet is her boss. She really likes Juliet's nephew, Liam. And, but I don't want to go too much into the book, but I just wanted to say that there was something about Juliet which made her the way that she was. And I like this book because I like how everything came full circle in this book. So while it was called Here for the Drama, it was pretty much a rom-com as well. Then I read Murder at the Country Club. And do I have it ready? Of course I don't have it ready. But this was book number 9 in the Miss Underhay series. I loved it. I loved every single book in this series. And I gave this one 5 stars. And I probably gave 95% of this book series 5 stars. But that was the 9th book, and I absolutely loved it. You see me looking over here because over here is where my list is, so I don't miss anything. Then I read 1,000 Miles by Bridget Morrissey. And in this particular book, our male protagonist, his grandmother died. So he goes to, every time I do this, it just closes. Her name is Dee and his name is Ben. Ben goes to Dee and says, listen, remember that time capsule we buried when we were in school? It's time to dig it up. My grandmother has passed away, and we promised 10 years after we buried that time capsule that we would dig it up. Well, this is kind of Dee is kind of at a turning point in her life because she just kicked her boyfriend out. So she's not in a relationship. So yeah, I'll go on this 1,000-mile road trip with you, Ben. So this was a really, really good book. I gave it 4 stars. Let me see what I liked most about this book. I liked that it was a second chance romance, but what made this one really good is there was something that split them up when they were in school. And that was what made this book a little bit on the emotional side for me. Then I read Can't Look Away by Carola Lovering. And this book was a really good psychological thriller. And in this particular one, we have a woman who is living in Connecticut with her daughter and her husband, but and now, as this book is written, then she was with Jake Tanner, but now she's married to Hunter. Jake is now married to somebody else named Sabrina. So why does the story talk about Jake and Molly's relationship when they're married to other people years later? More than that is they're neighbors, and there's reasons that they're neighbors, and there's friction. And this is a psychological thriller or a suspense thriller because of somebody having ulterior motives in this book. And that's all I'm going to say, because most of these I have already done the videos for, if any of them sound appealing to you. Okay, so the next book I read was a nice romantic comedy called Maggie Moves On by Lucy Score. Now, our Maggie is a house flipper, and she takes properties and she restores them, sells them, and moves on to her next location, and her next location, and her next location. Well, this time she meets somebody named Silas, a landscaper, and she's thinking, oh, I wonder if this is time for me to put my feet on the ground, for me to stay put. All right, since I'm sitting back, I'm moving my list over to the right. Then I have Local Gone Missing by Fiona Barton. Now, Local Gone Missing was a kind of like a mystery, a suspense. And in this particular book, we have a man who disappeared. Oops, every time I do that, I don't know what's wrong with Goodreads today. It's giving me a headache. Let me bring this back. So the next book I read was Local Gone Missing by Fiona Barton. And here we have Detective Elise King, who gets involved in the disappearance of a man in a small seaside town. Now, the thing is, Elise was on medical leave due to, she had developed cancer, and she went through all the treatment, and she's still on leave. Well, she starts asking questions and more questions to try to figure out what happened to that man who disappeared. And this kind of reads like a mystery thriller series. Like, I can see Elise solving more cases, but I don't think Fiona Barton writes series, but that's kind of how this one read. And I did enjoy it, and it's not showing that I reviewed it, so I have to transfer my review over because I'm pretty sure I did. And then the next book I read was The Quill Trap by Anne Cleves. Now, this is for the Vera Stanhope series, book number 1. And I know that this is a series, I think it's on A&E or one of the networks. And the thing is, there are 16 books or 9. Okay. There are 10 books in this series, and I have The Rising Tide for review. So what I decided to do was to try to squeeze in 1 or 2 more of these books each month, because The Rising Tide, if I'm not mistaken, it comes out September 30th. So my plan is to try to squeeze in a couple of books, at least so that by the end of September, I can read A Rising Tide for review. And I figure when I get about halfway through the series, I will go ahead and check out the show on TV. But I don't want to start watching that show until I read a few of the books. Then I had, I'm just going to bunch all these together, even though I didn't read them all together. I read 2, and then just yesterday I read the 3rd one. They were Ollie Cross by James Patterson. Ali, like Muhammad Ali. Ollie Cross, Like Father, Like Son, and Ollie Cross, The Secret Detective. Now, I gave the first 2 books 3 stars, but I gave The Secret Detective 4 stars. And basically, we all know that Alex Cross by James Patterson is a long-running series, and he is an excellent detective former FBI back to being a detective FBI back to being a detective. And Ollie wants to be just like his father. So those 3 middle grade books are the ones that I read. I had The Secret Detective and I think Like Father, Like Son as audiobook arcs. So I got Ollie Cross book number 1 as a library book and I listened to it. Okay, this is going to take a lot of editing. I read No Ordinary Christmas by Belle Calhoun. I really loved it, and I did read the second book in the series. I've had this for about 6 or 7 months, but I just got it read last week, and I'll tell you about the other book when I get to it on the list. So that was one of my print arcs. So I started off this video saying I read 2 print arcs, but now I realize I read 4 because I also read Corrections in Ink, and this is by Kerry Blakinger. Now, Corrections in Ink was the hottest book that I have read this month. I remember putting this book down 3 times. I had to put it down because the content was so heavy. Yes, there are very, very serious trigger warnings that this book would be accompanied by, like self-harm, drug use, and sex crimes. Very, very hard book to read. But I read this book and I really, really am glad that I read it because this particular person started off as a figure skater and she segued into a life of drugs and abuse to the point where she got arrested for having a large quantity of heroin on her and ended up in prison for just a 2-year sentence, but it wasn't quote unquote just a 2-year sentence. What she experienced is something that I couldn't even dream of experiencing. But she came out on the other end because now she's a journalist and she writes for multiple sources. And she even finished her degree at Cornell University. So that was Corrections in Ink. And my correction to this video is I have read 4 print arcs this month instead of just 2. So then the next book I read was Naruto on the Park by Clavis Natera. This book was a really, really good book because it was about a Dominican family who was facing gentrification. Their neighborhood was being taken away from them by developers who wanted to put up condos and shopping malls and things of that nature. And our main protagonist, she was a lawyer who thought she was about to be made partner, but instead of being made partner, she was fired. They downsized and they let her go. And so she's at a turning point. Meanwhile, her mother is also, Eusebia was the mother. She fought this gentrification. And then the father, he was a cop, but he also worked maybe with ICE or something because he did a lot with immigrants. And so it was just a very, very heavy book, but a very, very, very good book. And it was a debut novel. I was amazed that this was a debut novel. Really, really good book. Then I read The Lieutenant's Girl by Sherry J. Ryan. Now, I loved this book because last month I read 3 books by her, which was one story told from 3 different perspectives over the course of 3 books. So when I saw The Lieutenant's Girl come up at the same time those other 3 books came out, I definitely wanted to read it, and I am so glad I did. Now, in this case, our young lady her father is the commandant or commander on the base that they live at. And the one thing he says is you cannot date anybody that lives on this base. He wanted more for her. Her name was Elizabeth. She was about 20 years of age, but still living in her father's home. So she was living by her father's rules. Well, she fell in love with Everett, who, by the way, was a Hollywood star, but now he's a lieutenant in the Army. And that's why it's called The Lieutenant's Girl. And this book was so, so good because the attack on Pearl Harbor, when that came up in the book, the chills that I got then, I just got right now. Lieutenant's Girl, definitely 5 stars. I didn't put this as one of my favorite books, but you know what? I may rewrite that list because I put By Her Own Design as a favorite, but I think I'm going to have a double favorite. We're going to stick with Lieutenant's Girl as a favorite this month. Okay, my list is out of my reach. So the next book I read was The Lies I Tell by Julie Clark. Now, this book was a doozy. It was a twisted book with a woman that was out for revenge, and she was taking no prisoners. I mean, this book was just plot after plot after plot to ruin someone's life. Starting off as, I'm your new best friend. Yes, you're beautiful. And yes, you're pretty. Yes, you're smart. In other words, being a yes person, telling her new friend everything she wanted to hear, only with the sole purpose of upending that woman's life. I'm pretty sure I did this review already. Then I read The Catch by Alison Fairbrother. I don't even think I made the video because this book did not appeal to me. I gave it 3 stars. I could have easily have given it 2 stars. But here we have a young woman who is trying to find out the truth about her father. Her name is Ellie Adler, and it is a debut novel. So I give the author credit and kudos for writing a debut novel that got published by Random House. And basically, we find out why her father left a treasured baseball to someone other than her. And this is when she learns more about her father than she would have ever expected to learn. So there were some redeeming qualities in the book, and I think that's why I went ahead and gave it 3 stars. Then I read The Resort by Sue Watson, and Sue Watson is one of my favorite authors. I really enjoy her books. And in this one here, you have 3 couples who go on a trip, and somebody is not going to come back from that trip because somebody is, it's kind of like a closed room, drama where that something is going to happen to somebody. There's only so many people there, so one of them is the killer. And the tagline for this book is when a dream trip becomes your worst nightmare. So that was The Resort. Now that was a psychological thriller, but I read another psychological thriller, and that was called The Ex-Husband by Samantha Hayes. And here we have a woman who makes a new friend in the neighborhood that she's living in. And the new friend invites her over for drinks or for dinner. And when they get there, she and her husband, the woman that has new to the neighborhood, his name is Leah. And Jillian is the new friend. So when she gets to Jillian's home, Jillian says, oh, my mate, and I forgot what she called him, but my mate is out. He went to get some wine or some champagne. And so when he comes in the door, Leah, and turns around, Leah is shocked because it's her ex-husband, Craig. And I think Jillian was calling him something like Archie or something. So Leah had no idea that Craig, her ex-husband, is now living next door to her. Well, Craig was not only a cheater in their relationship, but he was also very, very abusive. And he also gaslighted her. So now Leah is back at square one when it comes to him. This was a definite 5-star read from me, and that is called The Ex-Husband. One of my favorite books, which was my favorite book, but I'm going to sideline that by also making The Lieutenant's Girl a favorite, was By Her Own Designer by Piper Huguley. In this book by Piper Huguley, we have a designer named Anne Lowe who was never given the credit that she was due because she was a Black designer starting from the 1920s to the 1960s. And the Jim Crow law was high and mighty and right front and center. And she was not recognized for her talent. In fact, she made the wedding dress for Jackie Bouvier Kennedy, who soon became the First Lady. And what the credit to the dress was a colored designer or a colored dressmaker. So she wasn't even given credit for her work. And I loved this book because I never knew who Anne Lowe was. And she is called the Forgotten Designer. And she needs to be in the history books. Children need to learn about her. As a matter of fact, The author said to me that this particular book was chosen for a youth summer reading program. So I am going to be staying in touch with the author because I want to see what happens to these kids that read this book by the end of summer. So that is called By Her Own Design. Then I read a Tilly Tennant book, A Home at Cornflower Cottage, and I love Tilly Tennant. Her books are always very, very sweet. And here we have Amelia. I was trying to say her name and it wouldn't come out. Amelia is living in a cottage that is falling apart, and she's also broke, and her parents have passed away, and she meets somebody named Xander, and maybe if he lodges at the house that she wants to restore, she can make ends meet. And Amelia is working as like a maid at a hotel, so she's not happy, but she is just trying to make enough money to fix up her parents' cottage. And that's when she rents the room to Xander. It's hoped that that money can go towards some of the upkeep, like a leaky roof or a broken pipe or, something of that nature. Now, Xander has a girlfriend and Amelia has a boyfriend, but yet they both are drawn to each other. So you have to see what happens to the relationships that they're in to see if there's any viability that there could be a relationship between them in coming up. Then I read We Had to Save Them by L. Van. Now, I can't say this name. I can't. It's R-I-J-N. But this was a historical fiction based on Amsterdam in 1941, and then it comes up to present day, and it's a young woman who tried to save young children from the Nazis, and there was a program, and I forgot what it was called, but she was a nurse, and across from a certain location there was building that the Nazis were using, and they were trying to destroy as many young lives as they could, as many lives overall. But what she did is she did whatever she could to save these children. Really, really, really good book. Another 5-star read. June was good when it came to 5-star reads. Then I read Summer at Blackberry Beach, and that one is book number 2 in that series by Belle Calhoun. Remember I mentioned that I read, sorry for shaking the camera. Remember I said I read this one? This one was Lucy's story, but Summer at Blackberry Beach, book number 2 in that series, was Stella's story. Very, very sweet story. Very, very good emotional edge in this story. I loved it, and I can't wait to read the 3rd book in the series. Then I read Something Blue by Heather McGovern, and I liked this book because our protagonist was a wedding planner or a wedding designer, and she and her sisters had an inn that made their location the wedding destination. But due to a food poisoning incident, the business was floundering. And now her best friend Shelby runs up to her and says, guess what? I'm going to get married. I want to have my wedding here. And then Shelby's fiance's brother thinks that this is a bad idea. And so there's a lot of conflict because he tries to get in the way of the wedding. And then, of course, a love story happens right in the midst of it. And then Ollie Cross, which I already said I read that. I keep saying Ollie. It's Ollie Cross, The Secret Detective, which I mentioned that already. And then I read Riding Jane Crow by Miriam Thagard. Now, I thought I was going to read a book that tells me, sorry, I'm rocking in my chair so much. I thought I was going to read a book that talked about Black women in the era of early railway travel. That's what I thought I was going to read. Instead, it was an essay-like book with hundreds of footnotes, which means it was extensive research, and I do appreciate that. But it was just like reading an essay. It was like being in a history class and your teacher's droning on, so I had a hard time with that book. Then the last book I read was Heads on Fire by Elira Nicole Ramirez. Now, there is another book. I'll tell you about it in a second. I wasn't really crazy about this book. Basically, you have a young woman who has a flower shop with her best friend and their partners. And she had a terrible, terrible abusive relationship that she barely escaped from. And now she is hot to trot for her new beau named Jax. But her business is in jeopardy and her ex won't leave her alone. The reason that I wasn't crazy about this book is, to be quite frank with you, I fast forwarded on, scrubbed forward on the sex scenes. I didn't like it. I was totally disenchanted with that book. So I don't even think I'm going to make a video on it, to be honest with you. But that's the last book that I read in May. But I did leave this one out for some weird reason. So okay. Before I read Ollie Cross, I read Sea Glass Summer by Miranda Liaison. Here we have Kit, who is a single mother to her son Oliver because her husband was killed in action. He was a soldier. And now his best friend Alex de la Cruz is helping her to restore a house that was left to her husband that is falling apart. And Kit wants to get that house fixed and put it on the market so she can start living life again with her son Oliver. Meanwhile, she finds herself very drawn to Alex, but the problem with that is Alex was her husband's best friend. And so there's a lot of guilt. And then Alex has survivor's guilt because he was right there next to her husband, Cameron, when he died. And he's innately sad over the loss of his best friend. But then there's the fact that he's very drawn to Kit. So there's a moral dilemma facing both Kit and Alex. But this book was very, very, very good. What I was going to say is 3 of the books that I read in June, the male protagonist had either PTSD, survivor's guilt, and a third quandary from the war. So those were really good books because they made those all emotional reads. The Lost Sister of Fifth Avenue, and that was by Ella Carey, and it's the 4th book in the Daughters of New York series. I have read the first 3. The first 3 was A New York Secret, The Lost Girl of Berlin, The Girl from Paris, and now this one is The Lost Sister of Fifth Avenue. And here we have Martha, who heads to Paris because her sister Charlotte is in trouble and she wants to bring Charlotte home. That was a very, very sweet book. Very, very emotional book. Gave it 5 stars. It was For the Love of the Bard by Jessica Martin. I'm just looking over. Yeah, that's the only other one that I didn't mention. That one was a Shakespearean, a book that was based a lot on the works of Shakespeare. Even the chapters were Scene 1, Act 3, Scene 2, Act whatever. That's how they titled the chapters. But we have a play that's being produced, and it starts off as a summer theater program that a woman was running, but she tells her daughter Miranda, "You're going to be directing this play." Now Miranda is only in the town of Bard's Nest because she's trying to get the second book in her Young A series written, but now she has to divide her time to direct this play. But there's a reason that her mother asked her to direct the play. It's her mother has a serious health scare. And then another reason that Miranda is distracted is because somebody catches her eye. He's a local veterinarian. I never say that right. Veterinarian. We're just going to go with he's a local vet who's hot, and he is going to steal her heart. So now Miranda has a heartthrob, her writing and directing this play, but she also has the role that she's playing and the fact that her mother is ill and the impact that it makes on the family. So I wanted to mention that. So, okay, I left 3 books off, so this is going to be edited somewhere in the midst of this video. And this one here is The German Wife by Kelly Rimmer. Now, in this book, we have something that I had never heard about. It tells us of Operation Paperclip, which was a secret U.S. Intelligence program that employed former Nazis after World War II. So, what was going on? Well, it was 1950s Alabama. The race for space was going on. And America brought in over 1,600 German men. Scientists, engineers, doctors, whatever specialty they were. Some of these men were former Nazi officers, but they were given a clean slate and brought over to the U.S. to work on rockets and things of that nature. Well, the book is not so much about them and Hitler's Reich and all of that. There's a bit about it, especially involving this particular officer who is our character and their son. But it really involves 2 women, his wife, Sophie von Meyer-Rhodes, and his name was Jurgen, Jurgen, and it also involves Lizzie. So the book takes place in 2 time frames, Berlin 1930s and Huntsville, Alabama 1950. This book was so good. Please watch my review if you want to learn more about this book. I always like learning different perspectives about what went on back then. The next book I want to tell you about is Point Last Seen by, I have to bring it up because I was in my kitchen editing so I can start dinner. And I discovered I left 3 books out. This is Last Seen in Gothic #1. So it's the first book in a new series by Christina Dodd. And I love Christina Dodd. This is a thriller, and this is where a man named Adam pulls somebody named Elle's body out off of the beach, and she is nearly dead. And he rescues her, and she has no memory of who she is, why she was there. And there was proof on her neck that she had been choked, so she has no idea who it was that was trying to kill her. So with all of that in mind, we have to figure out who Elle is. And while that's going on, we discover that Adam had secrets too. So that was Point Last Seen. The last book we're going to talk about is His Other Wife by Nicole Trope. Now, in this book, we have a little girl named Emily and her mother is Sarah, and either Emily calls her father or Sarah calls her ex-husband in desperation. What is the desperation? Well, Sarah says that the Whisper Man is at her window or at her door, and she's terrified to the point where she has a complete breakdown, gets hospitalized for several months, but now she's home. Well, the husband or the father, okay, what is he going to do about his ex-wife and the safety and protection of their daughter, especially now that he's remarried? So this is a psychological thriller. So there's a lot to this book, and that is His Other Wife by Nicole Trope. I'm going to stop there. I'm pretty sure I've already made the video on this one. Yes, I did. There's a video on this. I highly, highly recommend this book. So that's it. I'm going to edit this in and start uploading, and we'll call it a day. I got to play around with my editing because I have made a couple of mistakes, more than a couple of mistakes. And I know this video ran long, but guess what? It's a wrap-up video, and wrap-up videos run long. But thank you for watching. Bye-bye.